Nancy Ramsay. I am director of the Soul Repair Center located at Brite Divinity School on the campus of TCU in Fort Worth, Texas. And I welcome you to our webinar series that is co-sponsored with Volunteers of America, located at the Shea Moral Injury Center, directed by Dr. Rita Nakashima-Brock, a senior vice president of the VOA and founder and founding director of the Soul Repair Center. The Soul Repair Center provides resources for religious leaders, VA and military chaplains, and civilian and professional caregivers who support veterans and their families. This series provides information in areas of interest that are under-researched or for which information is not easily available but needed. Today's webinar represents an opportunity to hear directly from General William Green, Jr., U.S. Army Chief of Chaplains, who will address the meaning and priority of spiritual readiness among chaplains. General Green is a native of Savannah, Georgia. He received his MDiv from Emory University. He is a veteran of the Iraqi freedom conflict. He brings deep and wide experience to his current position, including serving as battalion chaplain in Germany, Korea, and as a battalion chaplain on numerous bases in the United States. He recently encouraged chaplains to practice spiritual readiness. Today, he will develop further his decision to name the priority of spiritual readiness and the marks of it in the practice of military chaplaincy. Following Chaplain Green's presentation, I will join him in conversation about his presentation and begin sharing your comments and questions from the chat. Dr. Kristen Leslie, a member of the Soul Repair Center board, will be monitoring the chat during General Green's presentation. I want to remind you that in approximately 10 days to 2 weeks, the link for a recording of this webinar will be accessible at this site under the box titled Previous Webinars. I also want to thank Sam McAllister, the skillful production staff person from VOA, who is assisting us today. And thanks to Dr. Kristen Leslie, a longstanding member of the Soul Repair Center board and recently retired professor of pastoral care and pastoral theology and pastoral care at Eden Seminary, who will serve as the chat monitor today. Dr. Leslie has extensive experience in consulting with military chaplains. The center will not offer a webinar in December. We hope you will join us in January on the 28th for a webinar focusing on unconscious racial bias in the military. And now, let's turn our attention to General Green.
I see that I need to unmute.
Yes.
Dr. Ramsay, thank you for having me as your guest. It's great to be here, and it's great to be with everyone on this beautiful day. I'm sure it's pretty everywhere to some degree, but it is a tremendous blessing to have a discussion about something that's really important to all of us and near and dear to our heart. So when we talk about spiritual readiness. So I'm glad to talk to you for a while today about the U.S. Army Chaplain Corps and our 250 years of sacred legacy that we have. We've been around a long time. We've been present in every major conflict, beginning with the Revolutionary War, and the Army's mission is to fight and win our nation's wars. And the world in which we live today is changing. Emerging technologies, it's being applied to warfare, and incredible advances in artificial intelligence. I mean, we see change everywhere, and it's rapid. The character of war is also changing. And with that, it means that we've got to focus on probably what I would call our most sacred asset, and that's America's sons and daughters who have made a commitment to fight and win our nation's wars by raising their hands to the Constitution of the United States of America and being loyal to that. So our soldiers must be prepared for the intense, prolonged stress and the significant destruction and carnage of what we call LSCO. Now, I am not going to speak to you today in all acronyms. If I use one and if I catch myself, I will make sure that I explain what I mean. So LSCO, that's LSCO, it is large-scale combat operations. Large-scale combat operations. And so the ongoing war in the Ukraine highlights the brutal realities of war. And the Chaplain Corps' mission is to care for the Army family. And we've been doing that, as I mentioned a little while ago, for over 250 years. So with that comes our responsibilities, especially the chaplains, right, in building Army spiritual readiness. It is a key and essential way for the Army Chaplain Corps to care for the members of the Army family. And I want you to listen to this quote. This quote to me, it means so much to me and many, many others. But it's a quote by an individual who gets a lot of attention in our Army. And just down the hall, if I walk out of my office and I take a left turn as I go out the door, and I take my very first hard right, I am on the Marshall Corridor, George Marshall, right? And here's what George Marshall said. George Marshall said, "The soldier's heart, spirit, and soul are everything. Unless the soldier's soul sustains him or her, they cannot be relied upon. And they will fail themselves, their commanders, and their country in the end." I mean, when you think about what Marshall's saying, he's already, just from the outset, given us an idea of why it's so important for us to build ourselves up, or at least for us to be in the business of building people up spiritually, especially when we ask them to potentially go off to war to support and defend the freedoms we so readily enjoy. So spiritual readiness is defined in Field Manual 7-22, chapter 10-1, or at least paragraphs 10-1 to 10-7. And here's what it says. Spirituality is often described as a sense of connection that gives a person meaning and purpose to their life. And what it does, spiritual readiness directly impacts the resiliency of individuals and soldiers and organizations. So encouraging soldiers to connect and reflect on the worldview or the value system that informs their core beliefs and principles and ethics and morals can empower them to endure and overcome stress, hardship, and tragedy in war and in peacetime. Sometimes I like to say, hey, who here has ever experienced stress, hardship, and tragedy? And I think in most cases, everybody would raise their hand, at least at some point, even if it's not to all three of those points, at least one or two of them, where they experience some stress or some hardship or tragedy. So building spiritual readiness, what it does is it's help to ensure that every soldier has an inner strength they need to face whatever lies ahead, regardless of their religious preferences, and even if they don't have a religious preference at all. Okay, that's one of the things I think that's really big in terms of what we do in the United States Army Chaplain Corps. We're there for all soldiers, regardless if they believe or not. We're there to walk with them and to ensure that they have the support that they need as they're in peacetime and also at war. So we have a program called Building Strong and Ready Teams. And I was tempted to use another acronym, but we basically call it BSRT. But Building Strong and Ready Teams, that particular program, if you will, it really allows our unit ministry teams to have at least close to 50 different curriculums that they can recommend to a commander in order to help deal with some of the challenges, and I also like to say some of the successes. So if you see good things happening, you want to continue to multiply those good things. If you see bad things happen, you want to try to take those away. You want to reduce those, as our Secretary of the Army talks about reducing harmful behaviors. See, another way we build spiritual readiness is through moral leadership as well. And that is a really big deal for the United States Army Chaplain Corps because it is our way in which we deal with the process of influencing people by providing moral purpose, direction, or motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. And that is with a consistency with the Army ethic. So moral leadership is critical, and it is a part of what we do every day. It involves sustainment readiness, it involves motivational readiness, and ethical readiness. You've probably witnessed some of this at one time or another, maybe in an organization, or at least as a part of a team. But for us, it is extremely important that we deal with these particular areas. And here's what that means. Sustainment readiness is preparing an Army professional to be mentally strong and resilient in hardship. Motivational readiness is helping soldiers integrate core beliefs and values with moral foundations. And an ethical readiness is influencing Army professionals to accomplish the mission as an ethical force. See, all three of these aspects are extremely important to total spiritual readiness. So Dr. Ramsay, I think at some point you asked the question, what is our chaplain corps doing to train chaplains to be leaders in spiritual readiness? And I would say this, that if there is any mission that we have, that is one of our most premier and important missions. Yes, we're here as religious leaders in the formation, and we're here to walk with our soldiers, but also ensuring that our soldiers are spiritually ready is a huge part of who we are. So our chaplains, as you all know, you may know, we come from a diverse background, a very diverse background in terms of religious faith groups and what have you. And so we're really a diverse group of professionals that come into the chaplain corps with a wide range of knowledge, skills, experience, and attributes. And what we try to do is we try to maximize that talent. Everybody brings something a little bit different. For myself, especially after I came into the Army, I took a year of clinical pastoral education, which is a very, very important part of being a chaplain in an institution, right, or an organization. So we train our chaplains in all three domains of leader development. That's the institutional domain, the operational domain, and the self-development domain. And I'll just say a word about what institutional might mean. So when you come into the United States Army Chaplain Corps, the very first thing that happens, of course, is, you get sworn in, and shortly after that happens, you go off to what we call the chaplain officer basic leader course, right? So Chibolic is it called. I almost stumbled there because I wanted to go back to what it was called when I came in many years ago, which was Chobik. But you come into that. So that's a part of what we would call the institution. Once we leave the institution as a chaplain and go to a unit, then that's our operational unit. Like for me, my very first assignment was in the artillery, and I'm not gonna assume that everybody understands all of the structures of the United States Army the Army or the Chaplain Corps. But I went to an artillery unit. So the institutional domain had a responsibility for educating me and preparing me to be a chaplain. The operational domain also has a responsibility for our, what we would call, wartime mission. And also making sure that I kept up on certain skills as a chaplain. And then there's that third domain, which I think is extremely important. And it's the self-development domain. It's the stuff that we do, on our own. Right now on my desk, I have a book here that I'm getting ready to read, and it's called really Freedom on Fire. It's a book about the history of the United States Army Chaplain Corps and their commanders during the American Revolution. So we're constantly learning and reading and developing and growing so that we can continue to meet the demands of our profession And a profession it is. It is absolutely a profession. It is one of those things that we absolutely have to stay up on. So if you were to go to Fort Jackson, we have what we call the Religious Leader Academy, and it has professional military education, like I just explained about the institutional domain. We also have a grad school, and within the grad school, there is clinical pastoral education, externships, moral injury course, combat medical ministry course, and then also, of course, encouraging folks to continue their education. And then we have advanced civilian degrees in clinical pastoral education and family life, and then also a curriculum for those who are in the Army CPE residency. And then we do a licensed marriage and family therapists as well. So you might be asking, Chaplain Green, what was it that led you? What prompted you to write this, this article? And I can tell you, as I started off, I talked about, really the way the world's changing, and not only that, the importance of ensuring that every member of our team is ready, that they are ready to do our nation's business and really our nation's bidding, which is to go out and fight and win our nation's wars. And so that is one of the main reasons I wrote the article. The other reason I wrote the article is really to prompt us as a corps, as a chaplain corps, to think about why it's so important for us to be involved in the development of our soldiers and their family members on an ongoing basis. It's not enough to do something once or twice, if you will, but to constantly, in support of the commander and the command sergeant major, to be there thinking about ways that we can make our units better and the people that serve them better. And the best way to do that really is to connect people with their sense of meaning and purpose, and also the values that this organization holds near and dear to its heart as a United States Army. So that's one of the reasons why I wrote the article. The reason I spoke about me being a Baptist in the article is because we all come in with our own different, our own backgrounds, our religious backgrounds. And regardless of which background we have, we still have a sacred responsibility, right? Yes, I'm a Baptist, and as I said in the article, I'm very happy when I get an opportunity to fellowship and worship with Baptists. But I'm also here for every soldier in the formation. And I'm going to underscore the word every, or even the word all. It's important that as we go about our mission, and as I go about the mission, that I keep that in mind. That I keep in mind why it's so important to ensure that every individual has an opportunity to have his or her religious needs met, right? Or if there's something about their values and sense of meaning and purpose that they want to discuss or talk about, that I'm there for them as well. It doesn't always mean that it's got to be a subject that's centered around religion. And so that's one of the unique things about being a chaplain. I oftentimes say that, being an Army chaplain, I think it's just one of the best things in the world, because I get an opportunity to walk with and serve with every person in my unit, and I am there to provide compassion and care to them as well. So that's why I think it's important. Now, what we've done, from this point on, is we've integrated what we call health and holistic fitness and the 5 domains into a lot of the other things that we're doing in the United States military. One in particular I'll talk about is what we call PCC. And as I promised, I will not just throw out something and not tell you what it means, but that's the pre-command course. And during the pre-command course, there's a day in which the folks that are going through that course, sometimes it's up to 300 folks in that course: commanders, command sergeants majors, commanders at the battalion level and at the brigade level, and command sergeants majors at those same two levels that go through that course. They're there. They're looking at nutrition, their mental, physical, emotional, and of course spiritual domains. They get an opportunity to go through all 5 of those domains and have some instruction through a course at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And so we're very intentional, because it's one thing for us to teach it to the soldiers, but the person or the leaders, they're the ones that own the program in the formation or in the field, if you will. And so what we do is we reinforce that by at least teaching them first, or at least teaching them why it's important for them to pay attention to their own spiritual readiness and fitness, while also being responsible for the spiritual fitness and readiness of their units. And so I think that that's a really, really important part of what we do and how it's all integrated into the curriculum. Now, we're not really completely where we want to be, but we're doing everything we can to ensure that our soldiers have the opportunity, and their family members for that matter, that they have the opportunity to become more spiritually fit and more spiritually ready through the programs and the services that we offer as the United States Army Chaplain Corps. And so finally, I just say a couple other words, and then at some point we can shift. So we're in the process really of trying to establish working groups to answer the question: how does the United States Army Chaplain Corps provide moral leadership training to the Army of 2030 and 2040? See, it's really something that you can't just sit back and wait for it to come to you, but we have to be in what I would call a mode of anticipation, to anticipate what some of the challenges will be, and then also how can we meet the demands of those challenges. Because in the end, regardless of what time frame it is, we're still in the business of fighting and winning our nation's wars. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, chaplains have been there from the Revolutionary War all the way through our most recent conflicts and wars. So we've been there. And we have a counterpart, which is the religious affairs specialist. And that religious affairs specialist is there to help us with this mission, to ensure that we do it in such a manner that we are meeting the demands of the entire unit, because they too bring a very special skill set to what we do. And that skill set is that many of them, or all of them, are enlisted, but they also they have the ear, at least, and the perspective of the formation, because people are more inclined in some cases to come and talk to them about the things that they're experiencing and the challenges that they're going through. And so, so here's what we're looking at. We're looking at policy, doctrine development, and then we're also looking at the institutional domain, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, with moral leadership training. And then also we're looking at the operational domain. And what we're working towards is continually expanding who we are and professionalizing our chaplain corps. No soldier, none, zero, should go on the battlefield and feel like they don't have someone there who loves them and cares for them and will help to meet their religious support needs. And this is why I mentioned up front, right? They could have religion or no religion at all. The Imago Dei, they're made in the image of God. And as a result of that, and our love and respect for them, for what they do for our great nation, we are there to walk with them and to love them and to serve them as they are on the battlefield. So I think that it's really important that as we continue this process, that we do it in such a manner that really shows the Army, the rest of the world, why providing for our soldiers and their family members is so important, whether we're at war or during peacetime. So again, part of the reason I wrote the article was to really, to focus on some of those things that could be challenges, right? So, and I would call it a deterrence. There's been a time in our world, at least there was a time, and it still is, where people are very uncomfortable talking about religion. I see that as a deterrence, right? Some might say, well, hey, look, there's certain things we don't talk about. One of them is religion, right? I like what the Army did with the definition in terms of talking about, spirituality being religious, philosophical, or values based. And what that does is it opens up the aperture for the types of discussions that we can have, right? And I left out the last one, which is also very important, right? It could be where a person might say, well, I don't have any religion. And so we could still have a discussion with them, even if it's values based, something that their parents might have taught them, or they learned in the community, or something that they may have learned in their culture that may feel like it's been violated or it's being violated, that they can still come and talk to a chaplain about. So we are constantly, as a chaplain corps, looking for ways to connect, because that is one of the things that's really driving a sense of loneliness in our culture today. People are lonely, and probably one of the main reasons is, although we are allegedly more connected than we ever been without devices, people are also extremely lonely with those same devices in their hands. What never will take the place of human interaction is the connection that we get through other means, such as our electronic devices. It won't take the place of the human connection. We were made for that connection. And what our chaplain corps does is it prides itself on being where soldiers are, wherever they may be, whenever they may be there. We are there with them, and we're there to help make that connection and help them to connect with others in the unit. So since 1775, right, America's military chaplains have been nurturing the living, caring for the wounded, and honoring the fallen since 1775. And next year in July, on the 29th, it'll be 250 years. And with that said, I'd like to say that we probably know a little bit about, connections and providing religious support because we've been around a while. But the thing that's important is we're always adapting. We're always looking at what we're doing and how we're doing it. And the question that we have to always ask ourselves is, are we being effective? More and more and more, we see where young people may not necessarily be coming to our chapels. They may not be coming to our Bible studies. They may not be coming to our luncheons or what have you. But those young people still have a need for connection. They still have a need to develop their sense of meaning and purpose. And I think we're the right teammates to help get that done. We're the right individuals to meet them where they are and to engage them at a level that shows them respect, compassion, and love. Okay. So we will continue our legacy and continue caring for the Army family and partners like you, Nancy, and the rest of the team. We will continue that. And I thank you for this opportunity to sit down and talk with you. And Dr. Ramsay, I am happy to take a few questions at this point.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I appreciate your presentation, and I am happy now if we could have some time between us to have some conversation from the helpful points that you raised. And I expect that we'll have more than in the chat following that. It strikes me as an extremely complicated thing to serve as a chaplain in an increasingly diverse, spiritually diverse group of human beings. Some being, a spirituality that is quite idiosyncratic, that it is shaped, that is unique to that person. And for others, perhaps a more familiar institutional form, like your own Baptist or my Presbyterian or a Roman Catholic. But that increasingly, as I understand it from chaplains, as in civilian life, persons describe spirituality in a highly individualized way.
Yeah.
And it takes quite a bit of skill to walk alongside a person who expresses it in whose spirituality is unique to them. I
Mhm.
wonder if you could say more about how the chaplaincy school and then ongoing education prepares chaplains to listen I'm sure respectfully and skillfully to for what it is that is motivating that particular person that when it's not a tradition at all familiar to them.
Yeah. I think when you become a United States Army chaplain, and I'm going to say probably a chaplain in any organization, the very first thing I think is important is to understand what you're becoming a part of. It's one thing for me to be a Baptist minister, but it's another thing altogether different for me to serve as a chaplain, right? To represent the faith and to support the faith of people from all walks of life. One of the things I really love about what we do as chaplains is we talk about really performing or providing. So there are certain things, that I may not be able to do as a Baptist chaplain, but I know that we either have a Catholic priest or a Jewish rabbi or a Hindu or a Muslim that can help, or even another faith group. Because even within what I just mentioned, those probably some of the major faith groups, we also do what we call a distinctive religious group leader. And that allows us to bring on people that may not necessarily be represented by the chaplaincy, but whose religious liberties and freedoms are just as important. And so they become certified to serve as a distinctive religious group leader. But one of the things I think a chaplain has to do first and foremost is they have to think about why they want to be a chaplain and what does it mean to be a chaplain. The term in and of itself is a diverse term. It's a very diverse term. In fact, when I came in, before I came in, I was called Reverend Green, right? I haven't been called that in many, 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 many years. And that doesn't mean that I'm not still a reverend, but now I get preferred to, predominantly by the word chaplain. And so one of the things that we do, or at least attempt to do, is to help people to understand what they're supporting. And the number one thing, right, that they're supporting outside of their relationship with God is the Constitution of the United States. It all starts from there, right? The freedom of religion. The freedom of religion. That's what we represent. And when George Washington did what he did years ago to bring on chaplains and to support us, that's what he was looking at. And it's only gotten richer, deeper, and more expansive as the years have gone by. And the reason why is because, of course, our culture is changing and the world around us is changing, and people are developing those individualized approaches to spirituality and religion and what it means to them. And so the very first thing that we have to do as chaplains is, like I said, recognize what we've become a part of, and then we have to listen. We have to walk with, maybe escort them, sit with them, maybe even cry with them as we're walking this particular journey with them, because it's a little bit different than probably what our mission was when we were in the parish. And that's not to suggest that we don't walk with people in the parish, we don't cry with people in the parish, and we don't sit with people in the parish. That's not what I'm talking about. Here, it is quite different. And one of the things that could cause that relationship to develop very, very quickly is the ongoing threat of war. And what does it mean? And where will we get to express that sense of who we are, as well as take into account the expressions of those around us? So we're the ones that, go to the commander help the commander understand what the needs are for his or her soldiers, and make sure that those religious liberties and freedoms are upheld.
I'm glad you mentioned going to command, because that is a unique privilege, I know, for chaplains, and therefore exercised prudently, shall we say. I remember, I've long remembered, and it's an article that now a retired U.S. Navy Captain Beth Stallinga was writing about Vietnam, I believe,
Yeah.
and talked about the fact that when they were going into battle, it didn't matter what their religious preference were, they wanted to take communion.
Yeah.
Some sense of connection, one assumes, with the holy, and dealing with the fear, understandable, that they might lose their life that day. And I'm mindful that in the way you're talking about spirituality, that it is at once, is increasingly the case, that it's highly individual. And then at critical moments, it seems to also include some longing for or reference to a larger power, in which one has a sense that one's life is lived in that presence. Is that resonate with your experience?
No, it absolutely does, in so many ways. And so I've seen that played out in our own formations as well, where a group of people will come together, and it could be something as simple as, a group that they work out together, and as a result of them working out together, they form some sense of connection, where they know that there is a group of people who cares about them, who respects them, who supports them, those kinds of things. In a lot of ways, I would like to think that, we're really good at forming connections, right? And a lot of chaplains are. I mean, they're extraordinary at forming connections, and it could be something as simple as, your football team, right? I have a jersey on my wall right now. My team's not doing too well, but still, there are others in the building that I may connect with based on the fact that we root for the same team, right? It's those kinds of things that kind of helps form that connection. What you have in war, though, is the fact that, look, you potentially, you're under a lot of stress and extreme danger. And as a result of that, that could be the connecting element that allows those individuals to come and say, hey, we want communion. Or, hey, chaplain, can you come pray with us? Or can you pray for us? Not necessarily identifying with any kind of religious background or faith group or organized religion, but just a need and a desire for, really a connection with the holy, or with the Almighty. I think that's extremely important, and I think we do see that from time to time in our formations.
At what point do chaplains or persons training to be chaplains focus on these kinds of, in some ways, creative skill, to respond to a very particular and sometimes rather inarticulate, I would think, not because the need isn't there, but how to articulate it is what I mean. Simply, here's a soldier who could die that day.
Yeah.
And at what point in the training and how do you help equip chaplains for responding to that kind of situation?
Yeah. So what we do, and that's it's a very good question. So our chaplains go through, when they go through Chibolic, they're there with others as well, right? So there are a couple of points I want to raise in this particular, with this question. The probably the first point is that a lot of them may already have finished divinity school, may have taken courses in, counseling, pastoral counseling, or what have you. But then there are also some that are still very young in their educational process. And so we call them chaplain candidates. But what those individuals bring with them is, in some cases, they already bring a desire to meet people where they are, through their experience and through their sense of calling to the ministry. One of the things about the call doesn't necessarily say that we're only going to, encounter people that think like us, believe like us, and walk like us and talk like us. The thing about the call is the call demands something other of us and more intentional of us, and that is that we are serving a higher power, and we're serving a God that's bigger than who we are. But from the outset, especially if you go to the United States Army Institute for Religious Leadership, when you walk in the class of a group of young chaplains that are just starting out, it is a very diverse group of young people there. So we don't have a Chabolic class for the Baptists or, the Catholic or the Jewish or the Hindu or the Muslim. It's one class. And one of the things that, that gets really, impressed upon that group is for them to learn about each other and their different faith groups and where they come from and their experiences. And so when a person makes that decision that they want to be a chaplain and they go to seminary or what have you, I think a good bit of them, they bring that with them. But here's another point that I think is extremely important. We are intentional about professionalizing the United States Army Chaplain Corps. And we're doing that through something called an external unit of clinical pastoral education. And you can do clinical pastoral education anywhere. It doesn't matter what type of unit you're in, whether or not you're at a homeless shelter or you're in or in a chapel or in a church or a synagogue or a mosque. You can do it anywhere because you encounter people. And people, from my experiences, they have all sorts of things, great things going on in their lives and things that are probably really challenging from time to time. It is there where we really get to hone our skills and to walk with them and to reassure them and to care for them as they're going through those challenging times.
Mm-hmm. And you and I know that some of those challenges are not only in the context of battle,
right,
but also in the context, for example, of military sexual trauma,
yeah,
which is too prevalent, as you and I would quickly agree.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that the challenges are within the force as well as external in terms of the obligations they swear to protect and defend. That would seem to me to complicate further the work of a chaplain walking beside a person who's experienced the betrayal of a fellow soldier.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what, Nancy? I think it's a very good point that you bring up. And, so where we walk as chaplains is we walk on both sides of that event that you just described, right? So we're there for the person that may have experienced a really tough and unfortunate thing in their life. And we're also there to care for the person who did that to them, right? And it could be any action that somebody did to someone else within our formation. What chaplains are basically called to do is to walk with both of those individuals, and to not judge them, but to be there for them, to help them work through the challenges of what that might mean. And the reason I use the word judgment is if you judge, then there's a tendency sometimes to push people away, right? And that's not our intent. The intent is not to push them away, either because they did something or because they experienced something. The intent is to see how we can help that human being through that particular challenge and get on the path of healing. And in the end, that's really what it's all about. It's the path of healing. And we're there to promote that healing and to ensure that they get the care that they need spiritually or either and through referrals, if you will.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the most complicated, or I mean, I could say complicated, I might say, what are some of the current challenges that most concern you with regard to a context that would support um, a, a positive and life-giving spiritual context for a person?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand you. Can you ask that again? Just let me make sure I understand it here.
Well, I didn't write it down, so I'll try to do it. But
Okay.
I'm interested in um, some of the current challenges that the personnel over whom, I mean, I
Hmm.
realize you have a broad, the broadest umbrella, but
Right.
um, but but that I also know that you're deeply informed from the persons with whom you work.
Yeah.
And so, what are some of the um, recurring challenges that most concern you, and that you are trying to help your units, your chaplains,
Yeah.
become able to address?
Yeah. So I would say that I'll clump them into, I'll just say that this is one thing in particular, right? And this is in support of what we call harmful behaviors, right? So how can we curtail those? How can we
Mhm.
really, the goal is to eliminate them, but how can we do that as United States Army military chaplains? And I mentioned up front that we have this thing called Building Strong and Ready Teams, and it's a portfolio of about 50 curriculum sets that we can, choose from to help us get after some of the challenges that we see in the formation. And we're very intentional about that. There are things that, go on in our formation that we want to make sure that we curtail. And we want to help soldiers and their families to live healthy lives, right? Productive lives. Excuse me. People who can strive to have some sense of meaning and purpose without the other things that might get in the way of that. And so I think that really, when it comes to our chaplains, we're really, really skilled and adept at kind of figuring those things out, because we do, individual counseling in the unit. And then, we might hear of certain things that might be going on. Remember, I mentioned the religious affairs specialists and the NCOs, right? Because they are more inclined to probably hear about certain things that's going on in the unit before we do as a chaplain. And they're really an awesome source of support and insight into the dynamics that might be going on in a unit that we might need to help confront through a conversation with the commander and or the command sergeant major, to help curtail those things.
What would you say, or how would you describe what you think are the most prevalent challenges to spiritual readiness presently, uh, as you hear them from those that report to you?
Yeah, I think some of the challenges sometimes it could be internal to us as a chaplain corps, right?
Mhm.
Because we might think, hey, look, I didn't come in the army. I'm a religious leader, so I didn't come in here to do spiritual, stuff, if you will. And I think that's a challenge. It's a challenge because it can seal us off from caring for and being with and thinking very deliberately about how we can care for others. It can, because it doesn't fall necessarily in a religious category, doesn't mean that it should not demand our attention. If anything, I think it demands our attention either way. But you coming or at least thinking that we only deal with certain things, and I kind of maybe put this in the category of I'm just here to do chapel stuff, if you will, and just the activities that happen in the chapel and not necessarily the things that go on in the unit. I think that's a risk for us, right? Because if you really look at it, we spend the preponderance of our time with our units. You might do a Bible study or whatever, or some type of study, a spiritual study during the week, and then on the weekend might do a worship service. But really 5 days a week, for the most part, we're with our soldiers. We're with them.
Mm-hmm.
And while
Mm-hmm.
we're with them, we may, have an idea, or at least get wind of certain things they may be experiencing and going through. So when we think that we're just, when a chaplain thinks that they're just there for religious purposes and that's it, and I know I'll probably get some, and I can be honest about this. I might get some flack for saying this, right? Because I'm not saying that chaplains aren't there for the religious purpose and religious reason, but they're also there to take care of those soldiers that may not exhibit any religion whatsoever, or may not even desire to exhibit anything about religion. We're there to walk with them. And so when we come with that mentality, I think we automatically wall ourselves off from them. And this is why I talked about judgment early on, right? If the first thing I do to my soldiers is I judge them, then 9 times out of 10, they may already be feeling bad about what they went through and what they experienced, right? Mm-hmm. I can still help them to work through some sense of accountability. I can still do that, right? Through love and compassion.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could illustrate such a conversation without, of course, not in disclosing, but just to help us understand what be an illustration or two of that kind of careful conversation.
So I'll give you an example of I was asked a couple years ago, hey, can you come to the bowling alley and talk to my soldiers? And I said, sure. Right. So I went to the bowling alley, and we're going to have some pizza there. And the chaplain, a young chaplain, says, hey, can you just talk to my soldiers about, life, pretty much. So we chose the word values. And I just asked a question. I says, hey, can you tell me where your values come from? Mm-hmm. Where do your values come from? Right. And so around the horn, people start talking and telling, hey, oh, mine comes from my church, or it comes from my mom, my dad. It comes from, a group that I either hang out with or what have you. And so that particular conversation, it opened up a really great and fruitful discussion about values. Mm-hmm. Because if you can't connect maybe from a religion perspective, you might be able to connect from a sense of values. We have our own values in the Army. It's called the Army values, right? One of them is respect, moral courage, right? Integrity, those kind of things. So that discussion was great, because what we did is at the bowling alley, we put the guardrails up, and we talked about the things that can keep you from going in the gutter. The guardrails could be your values. It fit perfectly with the discussion, because when the ball hits the guardrails, it doesn't go in the gutter. It stays on the path and may experience some challenges and, things along those lines, but it almost like it self-corrects, because it goes from one side to the other, and eventually it goes down the lane, if you will. The goal is to get this to stay on the lane. That's one way that I've had that discussion with soldiers that I thought was really, really wasn't a threatening discussion. And for some of the people there, it included religion, because that's what their guardrail was. There were some there that, as I said earlier, it was their family or the values they were taught by their parents, or a group that they hung out with. That group help inform their sense of values, or an organization that they became a part of, right? So, these things are around us they're around us everywhere, all the time. They're there, right? But the key is acknowledging them and then setting the conditions to follow them, right? And when it doesn't go well, you get back there, right? It's like, hey, I did 10 push-ups this time. I'm getting better and better and better every day in order to employ and at least adhere to those things that are important as it relates to values.
What do you think are if you were speaking with younger chaplains, for example, and I assume you have that privilege from time to time, maybe of speaking to an incoming
Yes, I
class or
do.
something.
Yes.
Um, how do you reinforce for them in the way that because I'm hearing you reinforce the importance of listening for the uniquely or the unique spiritual challenges or the that or the ways that might be articulated not in spiritual language, it could be values language. Um, how do you help them develop the skill for listening deeply, I guess, listening for what might not be said, but realizing, there's a deep concern here, or um, but they know if they said it to someone other than a chaplain, it could be
Yeah.
highly problematic.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the ways we do that is just reinforce the need to connect, the importance rather of connecting with people. So that takes time. And when you're with a soldier, he or she may be going through a challenge, or they may have approached you and just said, hey, I need to talk. I think right then it's important for that chaplain to put everything else on the side, right? I remember a time when I was in a unit, and my leaders understood that if for some reason I didn't show up to a meeting, I may have been asked by someone to talk, and that I wouldn't skip the meeting on purpose. If anything, I'm not there because someone came up to me and said, hey, I really need to talk to you about something. And I think it's important to really be there, right? Not in the meeting, but be there with that person and engage them at a level such as, honestly, prayerfully asking questions, but then also most importantly, listening to what they're saying. Where is this coming from? What is it that's bothering you right now? What is it that you feel as you're maybe even shedding a tear? Tell me what's going on? And to do that from a pastoral perspective, which then brings me back to what I said before. I says, I mean, if I'm judging them, I may not even get to that point. They're already feeling bad, right? It's important to connect with them, to really walk with them and maybe help them come to some solution, preferably on their own, right? But with a little bit of guidance and a little bit of nudging from the chaplain. But that's what I think is extremely important, even as we engage, folks out in the field today and around our units or what have you. If someone takes the time to come and just really seek out the chaplain, they really want to talk to you. I think they really want to talk to you, and they deserve our undivided attention and sense of connection with them. The first thing out of my mouth is not going to be whether or not they're religious or not. That is not the first thing out of my mouth. No way. Right? It's just not. I don't think that's helpful at the time. First, we got to connect with them. You got to be with them and walk with them where they are. And then as that story unfolds, then the chaplain with compassion and love and care helps to lead and guide that person to find some sense of support and help through that challenge that they have.
How do you want, let me put it another way, what would be the criteria or the point in a conversation in which you would want a chaplain to know that without disclosing an identity, an issue of substance, or a wider concern, has emerged? How are your personnel trained, or how would you want the chaplains in your command to discern that? And what is the process when that might happen?
Yeah.
And I think somebody above me needs to know this is happening in this unit.
Yeah, so you bring up a really good point, right? So with us as chaplains, I think probably one of the most helpful things you can say at the beginning of that conversation is I have 100% confidentiality.
Right.
That's the probably one of the most important things you can say. And if that person doesn't want to, if they're struggling with divulging something that's really important to them, then I think it's important for the chaplain, remember I said, to be there, but then also set the conditions for follow-on discussions, right? Counseling sessions, right? And letting them know that they're in a safe place. They really, literally are in a safe place. And that sense of confidentiality is with the person, not with the chaplain. The chaplain doesn't own that. The person that owns that confidentiality is the person that the chaplain's counseling. So, case in point would be someone comes to talk to me and they says, I'm really wrestling with something, and they're maybe in tears or what have you. And I can say, well, hey, this represents a safe place. Whatever we talk about stays with us. And I have 100% confidentiality. There's not, I think making that known is extremely important in a conversation, especially along the lines of, a person really dealing with something that is very, very difficult to divulge. And who knows what that might be, right? I mean, it could be, hey, I think I'm going to leave the army. I think I'm going to go AWOL or whatever, right? I think at that point it becomes the chaplain's challenge to try, of course, to talk the person out of it and let them know that, hey, things can get better. But if you run from it, you probably won't ever experience that they're getting better. The best thing to do is stay here and try to work through it.
So this requires, so I think what you're suggesting is that this means that part of the training for a chaplain is discerning the level of precarity. I mean, at what point would the chaplain need to discern this person's really in trouble?
Yeah.
Or the situation they're describing is potentially life-changing, if not more serious. What's the training for chaplains when, in that context, they're hearing something that might call for more than their confidentiality?
Yeah. So if it calls, we definitely teach about referrals, right? But even if we refer, the intent is not to chart what that person said to hand in with the referral.
Sure.
The intent is simply to encourage the person. Now, I can tell you this for sure, right? I've walked with people to behavioral health before. I've walked with them. They said they want to go. And I says, you really want to go? And I go, they say, well, they might say, yeah, I really want to go. Then I'd walk with them. I'd say, hey, I'll go with you. I'll walk you down there, right? Just make it look as nonchalant as we simply can. And then basically take them, where they need to go in order to get the help that they need. And then the agreement I make with them, and in a case like that, is I go, okay, so you're going to see, let's just say behavioral health for this, but I'll work with you primarily on your spiritual challenges that you feel like you might be having or experiencing. I think that's extremely important, right? To not drop them off and then just kind of go your way. Because there is, in most cases, something else going on with that person. And in most cases, the reason they came to you in the first place is that they probably have some level of faith and trust that you're going to do the right thing with what they tell you, and you're also going to be there for them. This is where the rubber meets the road to me when it comes to being an agent of care and an agent who promotes spiritual readiness, right? Because it's going to call for some sacrifices.
Mm-hmm.
And the sacrifice,
Absolutely.
yeah, the sacrifice might mean, hey, you might have to see this person on multiple occasions to help them work through this. So it's not a one and done thing, but it may be multiple times when you're engaging them, trying to walk with them as they deal with the challenge that they're experiencing. But I've done that. And in our Corps, when Chaplain Soldier was here, one of the things we started doing with the Spiritual Readiness Initiative when it initially started is we had behavioral health through the Surgeon General. The chaplains in behavioral health who used to meet to talk about the importance of each person realizing when it's important to refer to the other. Very intentional. Very, very, very intentional. And I'd like to say that that's going well for us because we were pretty out front and, and we did something about it by training together.
Illustrate, could you illustrate that what went well, without obviously in a just an illustration, not an actual event, obviously, but how does that play out?
So what happens is an individual. I'm going to use it from the behavioral health side first. So an individual goes to the behavioral health specialist, and they might say, "Hey, look, I'm really having a hard time with my significant other. I'm having a hard time, and it's gotten to the point, where I'm a little bit angry, and and I'm just not feeling like this relationship is making any kind of difference to me, or it's not, providing the things that I need." And so then you have the behavioral health specialist that's sitting there listening to the person. They may realize that this has nothing to do with just exclusively mental health. It may be a relationship issue that the person is experiencing. And as a result of the relationship issue, the behavioral health specialists say, "Hey, guess what? I know a chaplain. We have one in our unit. Would you like to talk to him? Or I highly recommend that you talk with the chaplain." Right now, what that does, Nancy, is it really does have a lesser impact on the limited assets we have in terms of behavioral health specialists. And now that behavioral health specialist is not just seeing that person to talk through a relationship challenge. They've referred them to the chaplain. Now, if the chaplain is meeting with the person and they realize that there's something else going on there, then they may even go back and say, "Hey, tell the person, "Hey, I think you need to go back. I'm going to refer you back to behavioral health to take care of some needs that's being perceived through the conversation." But in a perfect world, that's how it's a back and forth, where you've got these two disciplines, really collaborating together to ensure the best for that soldier or their family member, if you will. I use a little bit of a simplified version of that, but that's basically it. I mean, if it's on the extreme, and I've referred to behavioral health before, right? As I said, "Hey, I'll walk with you." I don't go down there and tell behavioral health what's going on with the person because we had a conversation in confidence. I just simply walk with them and then encourage them to talk to behavioral health. And if I need to walk back there to pick them up when they're done, then I walk back there and pick them up when they're done.
Well, surely it does. A chaplain's would be a likely person to hear when a person is genuinely distressed.
Right.
And I can think of it. I can think of several contexts just are identified challenges in not just the Army, but
Right.
I'm thinking last month our webinar addressed the rising rate of suicide in
Yes,
the Army, and I think you've just illustrated what a chaplain would do if they had some sense that this was not just ordinary sadness,
right.
or an occasional um, situation. So sometimes, I guess what I'm getting at is there's a real precarity at stake here if a person finds the courage or is able, um, before they've actually executing that plan, to talk with a chaplain. So there's a real kind of attunement to hear how deep is the despair here.
That's right. Yeah, and I think what you just mentioned really is a space that our chaplains are. I think we have some fantastic, marvelous chaplains who have walked with people and ensured that they got the help they needed as a result of expressing some challenges in their life. And again, it's the chaplain that may refer, walk with, and really strongly encourage the person to seek out some help based on what they're hearing that person express. Um, I'd like to say that our teammates are just extraordinary in that regard. I really believe that our teammates are extraordinary when it comes to stuff like that. So when it's deep hurt and pain, that is the space where I think a chaplain rises to the occasion and they walk with people and they ensure they get to the right place. And if they also need to, encourage that person to, to make that walk or to make that call, they'll go to that extreme too, right? Just really impress upon them the importance of making that to the point where they will express their personal care and concern for them. And when I say care, I'll insert another word here: love, right? You know, what you feel for another human being and not wanting to see them hurt or go through something very, very challenging or difficult. Because I can only imagine that, if you don't make that particular step or take that step, that could be tough, very tough. But like I said, our teammates, I think this is where we are. We strive and we do extremely well in that space.
For some pastors, in civilian life at least, there's a stress across the political spectrum, related to elections and unfolding new directions, or the failure to unfold new directions. And I'm wondering how do contentious national events impact pastoral work by chaplains?
Yeah, I think people are more inclined to seek us out, regardless of what happens in an election. Number one, we're apolitical, right? So it's not about me expressing my political views. Even if a person walks in to my office and expresses theirs, okay, they express their political view, but it's not my prerogative to do that because I am apolitical. The most important thing to me in a situation like that is to care for that person, right? And to help them to hope, to have that, right? To express some sense of hope and a desire for maybe a better day whenever that might come for them. But never, ever, ever would I go down that road where I'm, if the person says to me, I go, me too, right? No, that's not it's not the place of the chaplain, I think, or it's not a good place for the chaplain to be in. We're there to give that person a sense of hope and help them to continue to strive to be better and to live in a manner that that uplifts them as well.
So obviously you're not a chaplain doesn't disclose how they would experience national events. It's more how, as I would imagine, you would say, they're attuned to the distress
Mhm.
or the concern
Absolutely.
that that person raises.
Right.
Um,
That's right.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Because I think that you can cross a barrier or a line as a counselor or as a pastoral counselor if you go down a road where you're 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 basically embracing the sentiments of the person that came to see you, probably in hopes that they could walk away and feel better. So if we're walking down that road, then there's a good chance that none of that will happen. It'll just be two people in the room kind of feeling the same way.
What's it like for a chaplain when they exercise that rare prerogative of speaking to the command and um, whatever action is taken at that level, um, they can tell is not addressing or it's not addressing the issue that I assume that you don't go to command in any kind of frequent way. Obviously, it is rare.
Yeah.
I would, but on the other hand, if I'm a chaplain and I've heard enough stories that I feel a
Right.
situation needs to be posed that is um, compromising the experience of a number of personnel, then I'm I'm also then really putting um, my obligations, my identity on the line to go report that.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what what is that? I don't know how you train persons to discern that,
Yeah.
but I can imagine that if I were to do that and then I don't see a consequence, that would be challenging for me as a chaplain.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what the chaplain has to do is the chaplain has to give the command an opportunity to work through the challenge. And
Mhm.
probably most importantly, um, to not necessarily walk in there and start off from a personal perspective, right? So now, whatever the challenge might be, it has to be offered to the command. Now, one of the things I can tell you is that in a lot of cases, if a chaplain really has something tough to go and talk to a command about, there's a way for that chaplain to get in to talk to the command. The next thing that chaplain needs to exhibit is moral courage, right?
Yes.
A tremendous amount of moral courage, especially if it's bad or it could even be related to the person that they're going to go talk to, right?
True. Yes.
So some have employed, tactics such as, ma'am, sir, you know, um, I really need to talk to you about something, and it may be about you that is going on or at least being said in the command. And so then the chaplain may start off that particular way. Now, I've never gotten thrown out of the room before. I think it's always good to take everything with a grain of salt because you may not know if what you heard is an accurate report. So it's probably a good thing not to accuse or to come in and say, hey, this is what's actually happening in our command. The best thing to do is say, here's what I'm hearing, ma'am, sir, right? And I knew you would want to hear this based on the way I heard it. And so that's why I'm on your calendar. And then you express what it is and may even take some time to talk through some of the things that you observed or heard so that the command can then work through what it is you know, that you brought, what it is you brought to them. But the best way to do that is never, ever, ever to walk in with a conviction of you did this or you did that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
The best thing to do is really to walk in with the benefit of the doubt and just say, hey, look, here's what I'm hearing. And I knew you would want to hear this as a leader.
Mhm. I would think it would take substantial courage sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Um, depending on who the command, what the relationship is or what the record might be. And yet, it would seem to me, if I've heard you correctly, that the failure to do that would mean that you've lost credibility with the persons who are relying on you to be a chaplain,
Yeah.
to be their advocate if necessary.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In the training for chaplains, how do you convey or help to assure that these chaplains in process are prepared for that, or learn that might come, that they might have such a situation? How do you
Yeah.
prepare them for that?
Yeah. One of the ways you do it is so there's already a structure set up where there's for lack of a better term, it's sort of a, echelon or command structure. So
Right.
as a battalion chaplain, I had a brigade chaplain, and then I also had a division chaplain. So in most cases, I would walk that up, right, and say, hey, I have a situation that I'm currently dealing with. I need to talk with somebody about it. It's confidential in nature. I don't use names. I don't say who told me, whatever, but I need some help thinking through this. And in most cases, you can then go and talk to someone and express your concerns about how to talk through this, how to deliver this particular concerns to an individual or to a commander. And that's always very helpful, because what you will find is there's a lot of experience out there with some of these challenges. People who have had the experience at one time or another, or at least they're just really good at advising and coaching and mentoring individuals in terms of how to walk through that. Because, there's a right way to kind of start off with a situation like that, and there's a wrong way, right? And so you never walk in and then just start accusing people.
Right.
The right way is to, put it in context. Here's what I'm hearing, right? I thought you would want to know, things
Right.
along those lines, and then kind of go from there, and not necessarily the other way. Just coaching chaplains
Right.
to really think about that before they go in. And growing up in the Corps, one of the things that people used to talk about is the morale question. Hey, chaplain, how's the morale? Well, for me, I would always qualify that. I go, hey, I did speak with a few folks today who think things are going well, right? Their morale was high or whatever. The next day, I might go to another whole unit or battery or company, and the morale may not be high in that unit, that battery, or that company. And so I would qualify that, as opposed to giving an overall view of the entire battalion or the entire company. I think that leaders take that a lot more. They can take that, they can stomach that better, as opposed to a blanket statement about the morale or how things are going in the unit.
Because certainly it's putting the chaplain at risk.
Yeah.
You've got to you've got to so part of what you're playing out, I think, or you're describing, is the ways in which chaplains can be in the middle, and they need to keep faith with those who are relying on them, and they need to also sustain the trust of a command that knows you have that unique right, access, but if you used it every day, it wouldn't be nearly as effective.
That's right. Absolutely.
Right. That's quite helpful in terms of discerning the challenge, really, of exercising chaplaincy and
Yes.
Sustaining trust. And I'm aware that you have persons coming, I would assume, as more persons enter the military without a particular religious tradition. They're coming to the chaplain not necessarily because you represent a connection with some divine presence, but the person they know they should be able to trust. So that's that's a substantial responsibility, it seems to me,
Yeah,
for
it
chaplains to
is.
carry.
Yeah, and I would say that yes, some come because of the fact that they know that you are religious leaders, are that you are a religious leader, but then there are probably that many more that may come to you with no certain religious
Hmm.
um, you know affiliation whatsoever. But yet they know, like you said, you ended that with this whole level of trust that you might have in the unit and with the soldiers. And so they'll
Right.
come and share things with you as a result of that.
Hmm. Yeah, because you're the person that have that they know, even if they don't participate in a particular religious tradition, they know that you have an obligation, or they understand that's a trust. You are a trustworthy person with whatever it is they are burdened to share. Hmm. Hmm. And thus keeping that trust then becomes
Yep,
part of your obligation. I
absolutely.
guess part of what I'm aware of is that what you're describing is the careful balance that chaplains need to carry in terms of the trust of those who know they can take the risk to be the most honest, perhaps, in talking with you, and you knowing that if you go to command too often, you've lost. You don't do that on some sort of recurring basis. But I can imagine if you report a situation and there's no remediation, that's pretty difficult too.
Right.
So I think you've helped it as to play out here one of the real challenges um, of a chaplain's role um, in uh, in earning and having the trust of a person who knows this is a safe person, and yet you may not have the power to remediate, to really affect what is um, some plaguing issue that you wish weren't you know is not helpful and could be otherwise. I'll put it as carefully as I
Yeah,
can.
yes.
Hmm.
No,
Hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah, we're at the. I wonder if there's a closing thought that you have for our audience um, as we wrap this up, as time comes.
Yeah. So my closing thoughts are along these lines. I think it's important for every individual who decides they want to be a chaplain to know exactly what they're becoming a part
Hmm.
of. Right.
Hmm.
It's uh, it's I mean it's a tremendous legacy, a great legacy that we're upholding over now here in about 8 months or so, it'll be 250 years. And part of that legacy is also the religious freedoms that we help and liberties that we help protect. That's what we're here for. We're here to walk with the soldiers, to go with America's sons and daughters when they get called out to war or while they're back here at home station. It's an incredible mission, a lot of joy, a lot more joys than disappointments. And also, what a great way to serve your country and to serve the people that serve in the United States military. And so I would say, as I close today, it's been an absolute honor having an opportunity to talk to you about the importance of spiritual readiness and why that's important as we continue to go through this time of the changing character of war, because we could potentially find ourselves, somewhere else, defending the liberties and the freedoms we enjoy as Americans. And when we go do that, we want to make sure that America's sons and daughters are healthy going and they're also healthy coming back. Doesn't mean that
Yes.
they won't see some things that won't try them, in terms of their sense of meaning and purpose and values. But there are some things that we can do as chaplains to help them through that transition as well. And so, thank you, Nancy, Dr. Ramsay, for the time today. And for those that are listening in, I hope that if you're not a chaplain, I want you to know that United States Army Chaplain Corps, that we're recruiting. And if you're interested in becoming an Army chaplain, give us a call, right? I'll give you my email address. It's william.green, like the color, 508.mill@army.mil, and mill is MIL. If you're interested in becoming an Army chaplain, please, we want to have you on the team, and we want you to come help us to uphold our first liberty, and that's our religious liberties and freedoms that we enjoy as Americans. So thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day for this time, and thanks for hosting this event.
General Green, it's been an honor to have you here, and I also want to thank recently retired Professor Kristen Leslie, the Harold Peters Schultz Professor of Pastoral Theology and Pastoral Care at Eden Theological Seminary, who stepped in today in an unexpected absence from another colleague. So thank you for those of you that were listening, and remember that a recording of this will be available in the near future at the Soul Repair Center website. General Green, it's been an honor to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nancy, and Dr. Kristen Leslie, it was a pleasure meeting you as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.